Hi, welcome back to Examining Life, and today I am back with Professor Ani at the University of Ghana. Thank you very much for speaking with me again.
Thank you very much. Thank you to the viewers. I'm happy to be here again for the second session.
Today we are going to be discussing one of his papers, The Traditional Roots of Democratic Verbal Discipline, Insights from the Akan. Can you please provide a summary of your paper?
This is a paper about verbal discipline. Most of the things we do in the world, including our politics, involves the use of language. Language has a lot of role to play in how we run our countries, how we do our businesses. The role of language becomes especially important when we talk about multi-party politics because it involves contestation, argumentation, and democratic debates. The nature of the multi-party system warrants that certain people somehow find themselves opposing one another. I think in more specific terms, competing for votes. Now we compete for votes with arguments, with promises, and then with personal views on issues of public interest. The inevitable thing about power, including democratic power, is that contestation involves using language to show why you should be preferred to your opponent. Unfortunately, that can sometimes lead to verbal indiscipline. Indiscipline in language would involve the use of certain linguistic concepts and terms that are not very agreeable, especially the ones that aim to denigrate your opponent or your rival. We generally call them verbal aggression. So you have verbal aggression, physical aggression, and research is showing that verbal aggression leads to physical aggression. And the causality is not just positive, but quite significant. And so we need to think seriously about how disciplined our political communication is. The results are mixed around third world countries. In some African countries, politics have very often degenerated into verbal indiscipline, insults being exchanged among opponents, and all that. And then there are several kinds of verbal indiscipline. You have comments that might compare someone to a personality in history that is very unpopular. You have comments aimed to denigrate someone's moral credibility. You have expressions aimed to denigrate even someone's physical features. I remember the current president of Ghana was cited as a short man some years ago, and his opponent was saying that at that height you cannot rule Ghana. And then there are expressions targeted or targeting one's occupation, someone's marital status, someone's gender. So verbal indiscipline comes in a lot of forms. What is important is that we know these forms and then we know clearly that they are not very appropriate. A lot of people have blamed external influences for politics today, particularly use of the multi-party system. And such critics are very quick to see many of the evils that such a system is generating. This is clearly one of them. This is a system that pits people against one another and makes it necessary for you to bring down your opponent in order to win, or at least make your opponent look less desirable to the people. And that is why there is a lot of temptation to verbal indiscipline. When you look at some of our traditional societies, you see the efforts they made to kind of outlaw some of this uncomplimentary use of language. And among the traditional societies, I decided to focus on the Akan because I live quite close to the Akan society. I've been here for about 8 years. I've read some literature on Akan culture. I like to read about the culture of where I live, and that is how I discovered their handling of verbal indiscipline in the traditional society. And from all indications, I can see that the Akan handled their verbal indiscipline quite well, because they drew up an inventory of most of the categories or classes of indiscreet language, and they labeled them as taboos. And so if you resorted to any of such language, it will be regarded as a taboo. And so the punitive measure was quite severe, and but I think it helped to sort of sanitize the society. For instance, the Akan believe that when you are discussing in a group or in public, you do not seek to make comments that put down someone else. One of their policies or one of their norms is that putting down someone else is to put yourself down. They call it a lowering of the face. Making comments that could lower someone else's face, it's regarded as lowering your face as well. It's a very good thing to reflect on. If an Akan sees you trying to denigrate someone else, the Akan sees you as denigrating yourself. And his reactions, or high reactions, are reactions of someone who is seeing you as someone that's been denigrated. And it's quite reflective of their way of life. Even if you wanted to say something that might lower someone's face, you employ indirect language. You find a way to register the point without registering a harmful impression or a denigrating impression. So that's the challenge they like to tackle in Akan culture. Getting your points, putting your points across without looking like you are trying to bring someone down. And then they compiled several classes of invectives. First of all, you have statements or utterances that shouldn't be made in public. For the Akan, they have certain expressions you should rather use in private but not in public, and especially not in a public involving the presence of some kinds of people. They also have a class of expressions aimed at referring to people's occupation, marital status, gender in a negative way. Those expressions are not allowed. Also, expressions comparing people to animals, such as comparing people to dogs, to goats. Men who are promiscuous might be referred to as dogs. And so you have all those classes of expressions that compare people to animals are not allowed. And then the classes of expressions citing certain diseases in people are also not allowed. Expressions that, for instance, aim to cite diseases like leprosy, barrenness, and things like that, they are not allowed. They are tabooed expressions. And then expressions that target people's physique. If they are not tall enough, if they are not strong enough, if they are physically weak, about incomplete number of fingers, expressions citing someone as having 9 fingers, for instance, and all those, that class of expression is not allowed, it's tabooed. It's clear that these are different classes of denigrative expressions, so they're not allowed. And when you look at that society, it's a pre-modern society, but they were able to come up with an inventory of expressions they do not want to see in their society. So it's almost comparable to the modern system, including the legal system where certain utterances have been outlawed. Slanderous and defamatory utterances are outlawed. But it shows quite some development in the traditional society. So, but in that traditional society in particular, these expressions were tabooed, and anyone who uttered them disgraced himself, herself, and also the family. It had more of a deterrent effect.
If you made yourself look bad, that's one thing, but to make your family look bad, that's even worse.
That's worse. That's
Yeah.
much worse.
Yeah.
So that was how it worked. It's quite an impressive culture in terms of verbal discipline. Even though we have modern laws about verbal discipline, it offers some insights to us. The way the politics is going currently, we need to learn quite a lot from the traditional society.
Definitely. And one thing that I found fascinating while reading your paper was like the recognition of mental health. It's very interesting how the Akan society really valued that.
That's why I'm quite impressed with that particular culture. I've studied that culture quite a bit, and in the area of verbal discipline, they took care of quite a lot of things. They were especially particular about not referring to people's mental health. There were cases in the past, references made to people's mental health, and those comments were referred to the traditional council of elders. When verbal indiscipline is reported, or verbal aggression, the council of chiefs preside over it. The culprit is taken to a shrine to take some oaths and then to promise not to do it again. The combined use of superstitious powers, the tendency to believe that there are spiritual consequences for, being verbally aggressive. That was a factor as well. So I think the people of the time had to resort to whatever coercive measures they could find. Yeah, so you can compare that to the modern day punitive systems, the prisons, the courts. There were quite a number of disciplinary instruments for cases of verbal aggression. And I think that kept the society significantly regulated.
I kind of want to go back to the political aspect of it, and as you mentioned, like in democracies, there are purposefully opponents on two different sides or multiple different sides that their goal is to be aggressive towards the other opponents. First, why did such a system end up being implemented when it seems at least somewhat incompatible with the traditions, or at least the traditional culture here? And then also, is there like a compromise or a way to overcome that in the political arena where politicians can still obtain votes without being so verbally aggressive?
To the first question, the multi-party system offers something that is quite irresistible worldwide. What it offers is the concept of political alternatives. Without a multi-party system, without an elective democracy, there is no such thing as a political alternative. You have just one ruler, and you have to live with your ruler, whether you like it or not, whether he's doing well or not, whether she's serving you, doing you well or not. And normally you do not call such a ruler your servant. She is your lord. She doesn't aim to serve. But multi-party, majoritarian, elective democracy brought some new concepts. The first new concept was that, or idea was that rulers could be seen as servants rather than as lords. And secondly, that they could be changed. Yeah, so these two ideas are the most appealing aspects of the multi-party democracy. And most countries actually thought they needed such a system, especially in the wake of the evils of prior non-elective systems. Now, when you begin to practice the multi-party democracy, then the side effects begin to register themselves, and so you might not be prepared for some of the dimensions except when you begin to practice. And so verbal aggression is not something that is quite obvious when you are considering a multi-party system. It only becomes obvious when you have started the practice. And then when you notice it, then you begin to think about how to deal with it. So that's the first thing the practice comes first, and then the verbal aggression begins to emerge. We couldn't have been in a position to debate about whether we are prepared for the verbal aggression that comes with a multi-party system, because we were not in a position to know about the verbal aggression. And then secondly, to the second question about compromising, that act of compromise is what academics and politicians are seeking to achieve. It is also what informs this research, how to compromise the multi-party system with our traditional values. So we learn some things from culture and then we apply them to our modern system.
I also had a question about, I guess, the effectiveness of vulgar language in politics. It seems to work, but on an individual level, I don't really understand how it does. Like, say, for example, I believe you cite in here President Trump when he was campaigning, and he has said so many insults to his opponents. So my first question is, do those insults specifically actually persuade voters to vote for him or any politician who might be saying insults to try to gain voters? So there's even an epistemology level to this, where it's like we have to even believe that what they're saying is true as well. So it's like, how do we know that the opponent actually is a goat, for example, or some other animal, even like using it in figurative language? But what makes people actually take that as being true and then also cast their vote in that politician's favor?
Empirical researchers needed to find out the actual effect of insults, both on the target and on the utterer. So we need to know quite a bit about that. I think a result of that kind of research would be very, very educative. But without that research, I can guess, both from my intuitive knowledge and from yours as well, that insults do not really attract votes. In many cases, I have seen insulters lose elections. I think the problem that insults pose is not whether they will attract votes. They increase the level of the toxic nature of the atmosphere. They heat up the environment. They raise people's blood pressures and all that. And so they are quite disturbing. We need calm atmospheres for the business of democracy. And so, quite apart from the question of gaining or losing votes, there is the more important question of the effect of insults on people's peace of mind, including the peace of minds of the targets, the peace of mind of the audience, and even the peace of mind of the attacker, because attackers also suffer from their attacks. So I think there is an effect of verbal aggression on health. And so for that particular reason, there is a need to sanitize our systems. Moreover, insults sort of complicate deliberation. And then they cloud. Some people insult deliberately to distract or to cloud or complicate issues, particularly when they are not going to benefit from issues. So I believe it is the disturbing nature of verbal aggression that informs the need to do something about it.
And as you mentioned, the types of insults in a debate, for example, also raises people's blood pressure. And I think that also leads to, at least in the United States, the entertainment aspect of a political debate or an election season, and somehow it's that kind of anger or aggression that makes people be involved with it. I totally see how, like, it should be more of a calm conversation, but I guess psychologically, is it possible to do so and get people all, like, excited for it?
Yeah, there is certainly some entertainment in contestation. Any kind of contestation provides some excitement. That's why we watch WWE, we watch the boxing contests, we watch football and all that, and then we watch the races and all that. So contestations generally provide excitement because they sort of raise the adrenaline levels. But I think we can still do that without the insults. You can provide enough excitement by digging into people's records, exposing their incompetence. Anything that basically does some damage to someone's suitability for a position provides some excitement to the audience.
Okay.
Yeah, so if we are in a debate and someone refers to a past record that is not very good, that's entertaining as well as it's damaging, but it is not necessarily insultive. Yeah, so we can do without insults. We can still provide enough excitement without the particularly insultive comments. So I think there's a lot of excitement out there in the debates, in the arguments, in the credible arguments, factual allegations. So there's quite a lot of entertainment.
This question is basically purely a cultural difference, say, between the Akan and, say, Americans. And not even all Americans, but somewhere in our culture we have a kind of keep it real or being blunt and honest kind of mentality. And so I'm going to read a quote that you cite in your paper. And indeed, they hold that, quote, a person who uses blunt language instead of a euphemism, presumably in potentially inflammatory situations, is regarded not as being able to speak well. From an American perspective, we might say that looks like just trying to sugarcoat things. And is there a way to maybe not sugarcoat things and be bluntly honest, but also not necessarily mean?
Yes. You might have also read where I wrote that the accounts sometimes permit one to be candid. I think their major concern is that bluntness should not go to the point of verbal aggression. You can be blunt without being verbally aggressive. You can be decently blunt, stating what you want. And I think I have a formula for that. I think what we should do, as bluntly as we wish, is to make factual allegations, but avoid making value judgments. So if, for instance, I think my opponent is incompetent, I should avoid calling him incompetent. I should rather make factual allegations with the hope that the audience can deem him incompetent. And so, for instance, I could provide a list of things he did not do well. I could go into his records and show that he hasn't done well a majority of the time. When I do that, I think that I should leave the questions of competence to the listeners. Yeah, so instead of making value judgments, you focus on factual statements. We can be blunt about facts for as much as we want, but I think we should avoid value judgments. So I think we should give the voter some sort of respect. We should allow the voter to make her analysis. So all we should be doing is to exchange facts about one another's suitability for public office.
My last question has to do with, there was a mention of a ceremony, I believe, one time a year where everyone, I believe, went to the chiefs and were allowed to say all of the insults that they wanted. Can you describe that a little bit for me and its significance in society?
Yes, an interesting part of Akan culture. There are certain festivals where a window of verbal boisterousness is opened. and people can even take shots at the king and what he has done and not done. But I think that also shows the maturity of the traditional authorities, because I think it is a rare quality of a political authority that is not democratic to allow that. Yeah, but I think what it shows is that sometimes you need to acknowledge, even as someone in power, that you cannot have complete control over what people will say. And sometimes you might want to hear what they are saying. One of the good points of that is that the kings of the time used it as an opportunity to scoop around from people about how they are doing. I think the kings also found those occasions a bit useful. Yeah, it helped them to do better. Sometimes authorities, persons in authority, are overcome by curiosity about how they are doing in authority, and they want to listen. Sometimes they get tired of listening to their personal advisors, who probably tell them all the time they are doing good. So sometimes they might want to listen to strangers or listen to those that owe nothing to them. It's quite good. I think it's a lesson in governance.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any closing comments?
So you can see from these two sessions, we are in the business of improving our democracy. Both scholars and politicians are involved. And so in future, I look forward to more communications between scholars and politicians, so that ideas get exchanged. Meanwhile, both classes of people are doing their separate best to improve the system. Multi-party system of democracy was emulated from the West. Everyone who practices the multi-party system needs to improve the multi-party system according to local exigencies.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe, and let me know in the comments below what you think of verbal aggression in political debates.